Hello, Year 12. This is Mr. Ferreira, and I'm going to be talking through the second explanation of resistance to social influence, the topic of locus of control. Now, locus of control is a dispositional explanation saying it's who you are as a person is the reason for you resisting social influence. So I go through a definition that you need for this. It says that the locus of control is the extent to which the individual believes that they can control. So very important focus on they can control the events in their lives. So think about the things that you can control, things you can't control, and it's really important that you just it's about that general kind of belief in whether you can control events in your life or whether you let those events kind of happen to you in the process. Now, if you can control those events, it seems likely that you can control any situation where you might be expected to conform or obey. And that's where this topic is lying. So let's kind of go back into trying to understand locus of control. We find that we have two types of locus of control. We have an internal locus of control and we have an external locus of control. Now, this topic on resistance is all about the internals and not about the externals, because these people take responsibility for their actions and therefore are more likely to be resistant. We find that people who are external are the ones who feel that their lives are influenced by things like luck, chance, and the environmental factors like people. If you want to find out a bit more about locus of control, there are plenty of websites. This is an example of one of the websites that you can go to, and you can decide whether you have an internal or external locus of control. In fact, it's some research that comes from a person called Rotter, and he developed this concept as a part of a person's underlying causes of who they are. So it says an individual's perception about the things that kind of are part of them. He doesn't say it's a complete personality, it's a personality trait, and he does refer to it kind of just a basic understanding of kind of who they are. We see that he always conceptualized or thought of locus of control as being a continuum. So that means you have this is a continuum at the bottom here where we have it ranges from internal all the way through to external. Okay. And what you would find is that people will somehow measure somewhere along this line where they are. So you can expect that most of us will probably be somewhere in the middle, and that potentially, if you answer questions in a particular way, you might lean towards being a strong external or lean towards being a strong internal. And that's kind of more general. So they are less likely to ask you to describe or explain locus of control in that particular context. They're more likely to either apply it or ask you about resistance, and therefore the internals be more important than the externals in terms of this. But I don't kind of choose to just tell you about one, I kind of tell you about the whole thing. And we find that Rotter had this understanding that our life experiences would reinforce those beliefs on whether we are being in control of our destiny or not. Also, in terms of lessons, I have explained to you that a personal belief in a God doesn't change whether you believe that you are in control or not. But of course, your situation like living at home might mean you have less control. But ultimately, as a person kind of grows up and kind of has an understanding of what works for them, they tend to guide what we kind of think about things. So let's go back to those two types of controls, a locus of controls. And the one that's more important to us is the internal locus of control. And it says that that their behavior is guided by personal decisions and efforts. Okay, so you can really see how this is quite a strong positive place to be in terms of your behavior being guided by your decisions or your own efforts, and therefore they believe that the whatever they do, so the outcomes as a result of their own actions. An example I might use is that if I perhaps try out for a rugby team and I don't make the team, I then start thinking, okay, so the reason I didn't make the team is because I wasn't fit enough, I didn't work hard enough, maybe my kicking or running wasn't strong, and I need to kind of work on that. In contrast, the external locus of control, this is the kind of the polar opposite of it, says that your behavior is guided by luck, fate, and other circumstances. This idea of other circumstances. So your outcomes are down to events outside of your personal control. So using my example of trying out for a rugby team, so this person who has an internal locus of control who doesn't make the team will simply say, oh, the coach hates them, or they were sick on the day, that's why they didn't perform. It's all about these other things that are the reason for their own particular actions. So the question would be is why is an internal locus of control believed to be something that will lead you to resistance? There is a general belief as well that an internal locus of control is seen as being more positive, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. If you have done the test, you can kind of see kind of where you are. When we've done this in the past, most people end up being roughly in the middle somewhere. But if you are an external locus of control, you might want to control some of those thoughts like, oh, it's all Mr. Ferreira's fault for why I didn't do well in this course, because that's potentially kind of placing the blame on something outside of your own control. But once again, let's get back to the internal locus of control. So the person who has an internal locus of control, it says here, are active seekers of information. So in other words, these are people who actually believe that they need to control what they should do. So they look for the information that helps them. And as such, you could say, well, they therefore are going to be less likely to rely on the opinions of others. So look at the social influence situation, either being told what to do or kind of influenced by a group of people. They're going to say, no, I'm going to find out the information myself and act on that particular information. We also know that they are often people who have high internal locus of control. It says here are achievement orientated. So in other words, they often end up becoming leaders, people who kind of achieve a lot. So if you're a leader, you're less likely to be a follower. Then we have the third understanding of an internal, it says here, is that they need less social approval. So have less need for social approval. So once again, if you look at the social influence situations, they're not concerned about what other people think of them and their actions. And so therefore they're able to resist pressure to conform and obey. Now, this is really important that you do, when you're looking at this revision for this particular topic, that you do focus very much so on these ideas as to why does an internal locus of control lead to resistance. Okay? I do have a couple of evaluation points. It's kind of harder to evaluate, definitely worth looking at the handbook. But we see from this that the research support does turn to Holland and says that when they repeated Milgram's baseline study, it said that 37% of the internals did not continue. So 37% did not continue in comparison to 23% of the externals. So certainly more of the internal locus of controls were less likely to conform. We see that Blas has done some research of Holland's work. Okay, so this is taking Holland's data and having another look at it, and said that they believed that internals were more able to resist obedience. And of course, therefore, locus of control can be seen as a valid explanation for why people resist conformity. The next evaluation point looks at the idea that there might be something specific about normative social influence that makes a locus of control important. So it's a bit of a positive, but also a bit of a negative. It says here that locus of control is perhaps, it says he found a significant correlation between locus of control and predisposition for normative social influence. So what this is basically saying is that in a situation where if you have a normative social influence, this expectation that the majority potentially are behaving in a particular way, then somebody with an external locus of control was more likely to conform. So obviously somebody who's an internal locus of control is less likely to conform in that particular situation. But of course, what was quite interesting was in informational social influence, it didn't have as much influence over this. And in fact, you could say that locus of control only really works in a situation where it's a novel situation. What I mean by novel situation is that I'm kind of unsure what I should do because I've never done it before. And so in terms of that, Rotter himself actually kind of added this. He said that locus of control only comes to play in a novel situation. He actually said in familiar situations, in normal situations, we tend to do what we'd always do. But only when we have a situation where I have to make a quick judgment or a judgment as to kind of what I should do because I've never experienced it before, that's when we tend to be a little bit too more, we turn to our locus of control. So this locus of control does not affect the behavior as much as we'd like to think it would. In fact, Rotter actually got a bit defensive about this and kind of said that we need to kind of not over exaggerate the influence of locus of control. It's just one aspect of our personalities. Now that is a very short kind of section. Just to end with, there's actually a practical question that I'd want you to look at. I really do like this because a situation with 3 students, George, Petra, and Dan, and they are talking about their experiences about being nominated as the class representative. And then it asks you what type of locus of control Petra behavior shows, what type of locus of control does Dan do, and then it says George did not put his name forward. Use your knowledge of social influence research to explain this. And actually, it's quite a significant question. So if we look at Dan, it says here, so Petra, sorry, so Petra. Where Petra has also put her name forward to be nominated. She believes it's just luck. So clearly just luck means that she must have an external locus of control. Then we see Dan. Dan is a confident person who thinks that his fate lies firmly in his own hands. So clearly I think that we are quite happy to say that Dan is internal and Petra is external. Then it says here, George did not put his name forward because his father told him not to. So use your knowledge of social influence research to explain this. Now, this is not locus of control related, actually. It's about legitimate authority. It's about authoritarian personality. And I suppose the key to all of these topics is that you do revise them independently, but they kind of fit in together. So if George was told by his father not to, and he was obedient, it's likely that he could have an authoritarian personality himself, or that there might well be a situation where he recognizes legitimate authority and he listens to it. And I think the mark scheme kind of represents that. There's also an applied 16 marker. It says discuss 2 explanations of resistance to social influence. So therefore, it's important that we have a look at that. So we need to pick up the specification that says that only told us to look at social support and at locus of control. So then we read the situation. So we see, for example, that the students were discussing, and one says, I find it fascinating how some people are able to resist social influence, says Jack. It must be the result of having a confident personality. So clearly, a confident personality is about locus of control. I disagree, says Sarah. I think resisting social influence depends much more on the presence of others. So therefore, that must be your social situation. So that must be your social support. And what this essay was always about was about making sure that you had an understanding of what the knowledge part of this essay was. You had to explain social support, you had to explain locus of control or internal locus of control and why they are able to resist, and then use the application to explain why Jack is one and Sarah is the other, and kind of justify your choice. And then kind of finish off the essay by making sure that you have some kind of evaluation points that either supports or kind of criticizes both of those explanations. So a really interesting question. I hope that at some stage you do try it, and I'll talk about it in the lesson with you. There we go. That's all I want to do for today. I hope you have a good day, and I'll hopefully see you